welcome to the 412 Canada podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kim Hutchins, and at 412, we're equipping the church for greater influence through serving. 412 is a ministry of Faith Baptist Church in Huntsville, Ontario. We are so excited to be able to continue to equip you through our podcast, and today I'm excited to bring you Joanna la Fleur. Joanna is a speaker, podcaster, TV host, and communications consultant. She's been helping the church communicate the best news in the world for over 15 years. In this episode, we're going to chat about discipleship and evangelism and how to reach people in 2021 using not just digital platforms. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited that you could come and hang out and chat with me.
On like small topics,
yes.
Just like small things that we can solve
I know, right?
in
Just
the next
little
few
things
minutes.
like discipleship and evangelism, just the little ones.
Yeah.
So you are living in Toronto.
Yes.
And you're in a new place.
Yeah. Well, this is a condo that I bought 3.5 years ago or so.
Oh,
but
I didn't realize it was that long
yeah.
ago. Oh,
so,
my goodness.
but it turns out it takes a lot, like building a house doesn't take as long, but building an entire tower in the sky takes a long time. There's certainly a metaphor around, like, I think the foundation takes a couple of years, like a year and a half or 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
And then once that's like the rest of it pops up really quickly if the foundation is correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took a few years, but I'm finally in, and it's nice. Even this is a side note, like when you move into a place that's brand new, I put stuff in the washer for the first time, and it's a really high-tech washer. It's got I don't know why you would need this, but it's got Wi-Fi and all this stuff.
Oh my goodness.
I put the stuff in and walk away, and I'm thinking, wow, this is the quietest washer I've ever had. And then I realize, I go back to check, look at this, it's like it's spinning, and I'm like, this is amazing. And then I realize the water, like the valve for the water hadn't been turned on.
No.
So it was doing all the motions, but
wasn't washing.
Yeah, there was not actually washing
dear.
my clothes. So, I mean, it is a quiet washing machine, but not silent.
Yeah, not silent. That would be amazing.
Right, yeah. Anyway, so it's fun getting to know a new place, and I have a very small dog, like a puppy, and so that helps you get to know your neighbors. So that's been, I think, speaking of evangelism, I think that my dog is a great evangelist, and I also think this dog has been discipling me, giving me some more patience and some more even just structure to my days.
Yeah, right? Because with a dog, you've got routine.
That's it.
Things that you have to do.
It turns out you have to feed them and take them, to go pee and all that stuff.
Oh, and let's talk about Word Made Digital.
Yeah.
I love your podcast.
Oh,
They're
thanks.
so encouraging. And so how do you use that to train people?
Well, great question. I mean, in some ways, I'm always asking that question, how can we do that better? But the story of Word Made Digital, the phrase comes from John chapter 1, where I love how Eugene Peterson, the Message, says it. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And so, what do we do when the Word isn't just flesh, or not just but that now in this digital world, the Word is digital, that how do we bring Jesus with us onto the internets? Yeah. And in some ways, we're asking that question. In some ways, we're trying to answer that question for others. It's maybe best to say, we're one step ahead. We're not 5. We're only kind of 1, because there's constantly more to learn, and the technology is constantly changing. Yeah. And obviously, pandemic life has affected so much, but also has accelerated the adoption of digital tech for church, and so and for every part of life. And so that has been sort of a great international experiment of what can this do? Right. But I think further to that, I think it's also taught us what it can't do. That I think will be where before the idea of church online, for example, how's that going to affect discipleship, or how's that going to affect outreach? What is that going to do to our people if they can go online? Will they ever come back to church?
Oh, exactly, right. It was such a big question everybody wrestled with.
But I think on the other side of shutdowns, lockdowns, quarantines, all the things we've learned in the pandemic, I think we as a generation, are going to be so clear on what digital can do really well for us, and actually the things that it's not able to replace.
Right.
At least not now.
I know.
Maybe never. And so what we still need to get together in person to
Yeah.
do, and what we like long to do in flesh like this. Yeah.
I know. I love this. I
Yeah.
love in person. But let's talk about discipleship and evangelism right now. Can you kind of describe what those are or define them? Like, are they the same? They're different?
Yeah.
You know, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, evangelism or being evangelical, like this word is like really not a good word right now, I think, culturally, because it's been really politicized.
Oh, yeah.
There's genuine, I think, important questions and concerns we should have about some of our history if we're evangelical.
Yeah.
So evangelism, and I think even we see in the studies like Barna and some others who are really experts at data and studying trends, younger people, certainly Gen Z, are really, they don't want to share their faith. So if evangelism is about good news, the word comes from, bringing good news to people, younger people especially are really uncomfortable with that.
Okay.
Probably because of how it's been done most recently.
Oh, yeah.
But also I think in a pluralistic society where their friends are all kinds of various beliefs or non-beliefs, I think trying to convert someone is the issue. But it seems like from the studies that they're saying in terms of evangelism, having a conversation about faith and sharing your perspective with someone of a different perspective, they're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But trying to
great.
convert someone, they're
Okay.
very uncomfortable with. And I mean, maybe that's not a bad thing in terms of like we're not trying to coerce people
Right.
or scare people.
Yeah.
You're going to hell kinds of stuff, which have been tactics in the past
Yes, right.
around evangelism. So
Yeah.
if evangelism, literally the word is about bringing good news, and I always say it's not just good news, it's the best news.
Yes. I love that line when you say that.
And then discipleship is apprenticing
Yeah.
to Jesus. We don't have a model like that in our culture, other than the closest thing we have is like an apprentice who's learning how to be a carpenter or a plumber or whatever. But we don't really have that culturally.
No.
And so the closest we have is we use this word disciple, but it doesn't mean much, and we're trying to describe how we follow in the learning of someone who's gone
Right.
before us and
Yeah.
want to be more like them and want to grow into
Following in
who
their
do we want to
footsteps,
be when we
right?
grow up. Yeah,
Who
following
do
their
you
footsteps.
look up to?
Yeah.
Right?
It's
So
l-
then,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, just the idea of the Hebrew idea is this being covered in the dust of your rabbi, that you're literally walking behind them as they go about their work, and that like the dust from their feet is coming up onto you. And it kind of literally rubs off on you. What they're doing, how they're teaching, becomes part of you. And so that's discipleship. But I think in many ways it's the same thing, don't you think?
Yeah, I do.
We all need to be I think I need to be reminded of the good news of Jesus every day, week,
Yeah, I was going to
month.
say definitely every day, right? Like, because if
Yeah.
not, you lose your focus
Yeah.
on why you're doing it.
Yeah.
And you need discipleship. They really go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, in many ways, on the discipleship side, when we think of the disciples, those 12 guys that follow Jesus, where would we say, oh, that's where they became a Christian or the
Yeah.
profession of faith? I mean, we see that they say, yes, I'll follow you, but they don't really know him yet.
I know.
And then along the way, they start to have more and more realizations. But then they all run away and say, I don't want anything to do with this because we're all going to get killed here. And then he brings them back. He reveals himself alive again after Easter. But my point being, like, they were sort of being discipled long before maybe what we would define as a true believer. They weren't believers in him and whatever that
they
means.
just
They
were
didn't
like,
check
"I'm
off
gonna
all the
follow
doctrine.
you. Yeah, I want to learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is this?
So that's
right?
where I think evangelism and discipleship, we've separated them, but I think we're much more ready, certainly younger people are ready for those to be tied, because we all probably need to be reminded of good news, and we can be a disciple following after Jesus long before we believe almost anything about what he says.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
So then how can people reach others in 2021, right? Maybe using digital or not digital,
Yeah.
without any digital help, what's the best way?
Well, I think the best way is different for every person in some sense.
Yeah.
That God has given us all unique ways to go about it. That that even within those first disciples, there was different approaches and styles, and sometimes we see in the New Testament there was divisions because of their approach.
Yeah.
But we need different kinds of people to reach different kinds of people, and so I think the biggest idea would be that there isn't one way. Maybe there are some bad ways. Again, maybe we've kind of mentioned those about like scaring people and whatever. But I think ultimately that God uses our unique gifts, and so for some people they're just so good one-on-one. Other people can mesmerize a crowd, and other people are going to be really like digital savvy, and they start a TikTok account where they encourage people, and it turns out that encouragement is like biblical truth, but they maybe didn't know that right away. I mean, there's so many ways that we can imagine now. I think that there are just so many tools available to us, it feels overwhelming. And in that sense, I would just say, if we can all ask, like, what, God, are the ways you've made me? And what are the things that I love to do, or the things I'm talented in? And what are some things maybe I'm scared of and I need to kind of grow my muscles in?
Ooh, that's a good question, because sometimes you just think about the things that you're good at. Well, I want to do those. But the things that maybe scare me, that may challenge me, that God can use those as well, right?
Right. Well, I think there's that, we often, I think it's used as an excuse, the preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words. If people haven't heard that before, it's often like a famous, it's this, monk from 500 years ago who said it. And the idea was your life should reveal Christ. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't also talk about him. It's hard for people to know if you never talk about it. And so Jesus simply said to people, come and see. Like, come and follow me. Come be around me. I'm going to talk about it as I go, but you're going to see it in my life. I hope you'll see it in my words, that they'll go together.
Well, and talking about it constantly, right? Like, I think that just makes such a difference and speaks volumes when it's always part of your language. Right, in your conversation, that it's not just a once in a while thing. It seems off. So.
Well, that's it. That it's just that if Christ is part of your life, that it would be sort of a natural thing, as natural as talking about what you did on the weekend, talking about the Netflix show you watched. Like, it's part of your life, so it kind of comes out. And I think when I think of some of the people who I know who are really gifted at talking to people about Jesus, it's just part of their life. Like a friend of mine who, in her workplace, so many people started going to church with her. And I said, how has this happened?
How did you do that?
Because not just them, but then they bring their family eventually, and then they're whole families are converting because of this friend of mine. Because of Jesus. But she's being used by him, and she just says, well, like, it just usually starts with, like, someone will say, what have I done on the weekend? And I'll include that I went to church, because it is something I did.
Yes.
And then if anyone is interested, they'll be like, oh, I used to go to church, or like, oh, church, why did you do that? Or whatever it is. Most people won't say anything, but there's a few who will pull at the thread. And you never know.
Smart.
You never know what might come. So when we sprinkle it into our life, very naturally, I think we begin to see who is curious, and then they get to come and see more.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you about this line. What do you mean by digital first, but not digital only? Right, to give some examples. So if you can talk about that.
Well, just in general, I kind of liken this whole church thing, but certainly how we connect to God these days. It's kind of like a dating app, wherein the first place you connect is this digital app.
Right.
But assuming you're a healthy person in this context, the point of it is to meet someone you never would have met otherwise, get to know them a little bit, but then ultimately you do want to meet in person. That's the point of the dating app. And so after you've met in person, if you want to continue the relationship, your phone, your email, your FaceTime, like digital is still part of the relationship. But it's always kind of to bridge between the times you're together in person.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about digital first, not digital only, I think digital first is, for many people these days, it will be the first place, and it's probably a place that formed their opinion on Christians, media, content about us.
Yes.
A lot of it's
Oh,
not
for sure.
good, but it's a place that they're having an opportunity to explore a question about faith or God. It's a way for them maybe to see your own post or content.
Yeah.
For some people, it feels non-threatening. So if you can be texting or DM about it, it's maybe just an easier way into a conversation. It's certainly a place people will probably see at church before they ever come in person. But then from there, not digital only. So digital first, but then once we have some connection, we're going to meet in person, or we're going to have a small group that can gather, whether it's the discipleship side or the evangelism side, that they're both kind of happening in both worlds.
Okay.
But that we want to think about that the first places people are interacting with it is probably digital.
Okay, so then what are the place of personal relationships versus the church versus the Holy Spirit and all of that?
Well, if the Holy Spirit isn't involved, we know this, we can say it, but it's so true and we can't lose sight. Like, if the Holy Spirit isn't involved, it's just us. And if it's just us, like,
and it
what
usually doesn't work.
Like, what are we inviting anyone into? It's just like another guru, another self-help community, another meditation class. Like, what are we inviting them to? So that the Holy Spirit would be empowering us with courage, empowering us with insight maybe to ask a question we might not have thought of, but that they need to be asked.
Yeah, even just that simple question, right? Like, what did you do on the weekend? To include I went to church.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and believing that God's involved before we showed up.
Yeah.
So that when you say you went to church on the weekend, or you were at a small group Bible study, you went to a Christian conference, or I don't know, you like Christian music, whatever it is, that was the casual entry point.
Yeah.
The Holy Spirit might have already been working in them, so that when they heard you say that, their ears perk up. And for some, they might say, "Oh, tell me a bit more about why'd you do that?" Or "That seems weird," or like, "May I ask about that?" or whatever. And some won't, but they may later. You never know. Because it's there. And so that's where, of course, we're involved. That, like, we're God's plan. That's scary. That we are His plan. Go into all the world and and baptize and disciple people. That we are the plan. But that plan is go with Him, not go by ourselves.
Yeah. And what is something that you could say for those that are joining us to encourage them to reach out to people around them and share, right? Like, where could they start, or what's a good action to take, something that's practical?
Well, I think the first thing is maybe what I said is just, share your life with people. Don't hide the part of your life that was the Christian piece. Because you don't have to shove it at people, that we can just talk about it as normally as we talked about the other things we do. And if people want to ask a little more, maybe they would. That would be really a simple starting point. But I'm reminded over and over that so many people who become believers in Jesus, who become disciples or start getting curious and start walking in this direction, it wasn't because the person was perfect. Actually, that person was probably a bit of a mess. When some of the best people talk about Jesus, they just met Him themselves and they can't help but, like, they're still addicted to the things they're addicted to, or they still, whatever the list is of problems that we've all got. But it's not about, if I just fix this first. I think so many people, if Jesus is involved, then trust that we don't have to always be some perfect person. I think actually that probably makes people less interested because nobody is.
Right. It's so true. And actually, I was just wondering, so for those that are leading volunteers in the local church, what are some ways that they can encourage those that are serving under them in evangelism and discipleship?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. That's a whole conversation we could have.
I know. I just thought I'd throw that out there, and we'll discuss it later. But just a little.
For people leading volunteers, I think continuing to encourage them to not be in the church all the time. That's maybe seems counterintuitive, but that as we serve in the church, you know, what are the ways that we're involved with our neighbors? Even if it's like I was saying, my little dog evangelist, you know, that are we finding ways or reasons to interact with people who aren't just in the church community? Yeah. That would be my first thing, to encourage your people.
Yeah. Do you even know your neighbors?
To
right?
just start with like the 5 houses around you or the 5 properties around you. That's a start. Just to even know them, and the simple things of baking cookies, or maybe if it's COVID, it has to be something sealed, so it's a bottle of wine or it's a bag of chips. It doesn't matter. It can be just a gesture of hospitality. Yeah. I would encourage people to know their neighbors. But with Jesus, I think that following after him, it does look a little different for all of us. There may be some not great ways, but overall that it's going to be kind of unique to us. So I think some people can feel that guilt of like, I haven't read my Bible every day. Yeah. Or like, well, what about like the audio Bible? That there's other ways to engage. If that's not like the primary place for you, rather than being full of guilt all the time that you're not being discipled in the scriptures, like maybe there's another way for you to access it. Yeah. Through audio or through, some amazing video content. I mean, just even as like an entry point, if you're feeling like, well, if I can't do it every day, I won't do it. I can't do it at all.
Yeah, no, just start.
Just start. Yeah. That like, what does it look like? That idea of being like walking with as the rabbi walks, as the teacher Jesus walks ahead of us. Yeah. Are we close enough that like some of the dust from his feet is getting up onto us?
Yeah, that's such a great thought. Joanna, I love chatting with you, and I just love the excitement that you bring about sharing the best news ever. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, and I hope that everyone who's listening is so encouraged by you.
Thanks so much.
Well, for those joining us, I hope that you're inspired by Joanna to reach those around you with the good news. There are links for Word Made Digital and other resources she mentioned. They'll be available on our show notes. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. And for those watching the video edition, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode. Also, hop into the discussion by following us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at 412 Canada. Looking forward to next time. Thanks for joining us. Nice pull away.
Awesome.
Yay. Good.
Look at that.
Down.
And I've turned and I'm talking to the camera. That was awesome.